Hi, everyone. This is Peggy Symingson. I'm talking about some personal thoughts and commentary about kind of reflecting back on the pandemic and thinking about the need to prepare for any future disasters, whether small, like weather events, which we've been having a lot more of lately globally, or another health crisis like we did during the pandemic. Now, when we were in the pandemic, we were quarantined and staying at home, etc. However, if we were to have another health situation, hopefully we would not be told to stay at home or quarantine. Nevertheless, we need to be prepared in case of crisis or disaster in order to switch to online teaching if needed. And what I want to start with is sharing that I actually predicted this in 2014. So I'm going to share my screen and share a blog post that I wrote October 3rd, 2014. And I was thinking specifically about the health incident we had with Ebola in 2014 in the Dallas area. So the Ebola virus was spread through, I believe, air travel. There were some cases of it in the Metroplex in the Dallas area, mainly, not so much on the Fort Worth side. But nevertheless, there was a lot of fear, alarm, and anxiety. I actually started thinking about two issues. So communicating to people that don't speak English. So how do we disseminate health information in a crisis to multilingual people through print, text, or digital media? So health literacy and access to information. What was the status of that? That got me thinking about that. And can people access the information needed in order to mitigate or be safe or, that kind of thing. And then the second was, how do we continue education during quarantine? So I believe it was the Fort Worth School District that closed down. And it got me thinking, why does education have to stop? The Ebola virus had not yet spread to Fort Worth, but nevertheless, I believe there were some school closures and talk of school closures. So my questions were, are we ready? Are K-12 educators ready and capable to teach via distance scenarios as they arise? And again, this was 2014. And then it really got me thinking, what do families do in the home? How do parents help? And that's really tied to online and distance education, preparing, etc. So thinking about those things also came out of the swine flu H1N1 virus that also threatened us around 2009. So between the swine flu, the Ebola, and a third incident, which I'll talk about right now, I really started thinking on these issues that later came to actually be during the pandemic. In other words, our lack of readiness could have been prevented. We heard a lot of talk about these are unprecedented times. And my immediate thought when we were starting to quarantine and pivot, as they say, to online learning, my immediate thought was, well, no, we should have been ready for this. We had indications of this. We've had pandemics before. That's not unprecedented. The scale at which it happened might have been, but the need to foresee what's coming and the need to build our capacity in order to be prepared was a shame that we weren't better prepared. And my concern is that we're not going to be prepared for the next fiasco. Like I said, whether it's a wildfire, floods, whatever, hurricane here in Texas, Hurricane Harvey caused a lot of trouble. So again, this was something I predicted. The third incident was a training I had through a Blackboard LMS learning management system trainer around 2011, so shortly after the swine flu. And when we were learning about synchronous learning, teaching live, through synchronous learning in 2011, which is like the Stone Age compared to what we were doing during the pandemic, the presenter said, synchronous learning can come in really handy during times of disaster, like a pandemic. And I immediately clicked on that. And that also contributed to this thinking that I just shared in 2014. Well, I didn't drop that ball, although I never did research on these issues. I thought really hard about it. I have done issues more broadly. I have done research more broadly on online learning in general, but not in terms of preparedness per se. But it really got me thinking, and I didn't let that go, and I started going around saying, we need to be prepared. We're going to have an emergency one day, and faculty need to pivot. I didn't use the word pivot, but switch over quickly. And I always knew that. I knew it in my gut and in my bones and everything. I knew this. So that when the pandemic happened, I was ready to hit the ground running. So my question is, why aren't we all ready to hit the ground running? I mean, 100% of faculty, 100% of K-12 teachers, and do it in ways that are supported by both training and infrastructure. So training means building knowledge and not just how to turn on a webcam, but actually how to design online teaching, how to create materials, and then be provided with the resources that you need to learn about online learning and to actually do things. I remember during the pandemic, people didn't have laptops, students didn't have laptops, we didn't have Wi-Fi. Why was that? Why aren't we building this continuous infrastructure so that we can switch to online learning in a time of crisis, or just because the demand's there? But that's a whole nother issue. So I'm going to stop sharing. I'm back. So those are kind of my initial thoughts. The 2014 post where I, predicted a lot of these things, and others have too. I'm not the only one that has predicted that, but we need to take seriously the need to be disaster ready in terms of our pedagogy. So a sort of disaster ready pedagogy approach is needed. Again, getting past the unprecedented part, and as others have stated, like Charles Hodges and others have stated, distinguishing between emergency remote teaching and sort of the true online learning. And a couple more analogies, it's kind of like we say winter is coming, right? We know winter is coming, so we prepare for it. We know that we're going to have either small scale or large scale disasters coming. So 100% of us need to be on board with that. Or it's just like we wouldn't not have fire stations, because we know that fires happen, and in certain areas, like where it's really dry, we really need to be extra prepared, and so on. So we know it's coming. What are we doing about it in the meantime? And then the name for this, of course, is academic continuity. And so what are our plans? How are we equipping ourselves? How are we building capacity? How are we changing our attitudes towards online learning? Because part of the problem is seeing online learning as inferior, as kind of, the stepchild to real learning. Real learning takes place in the brick and mortar is sort of the default assumption. And so we need to really move past that. There are many other issues involved here, like valuing teaching in the first place, building infrastructure for basic teaching in non-crisis times. Those are all important. But basically, we need to rethink how we see quality online learning. We need to kind of analyze what went wrong during the pandemic, right? Like the emergency remote teaching was so sudden and so immediate that some or many of us were not prepared. And so how can we change that? There's a lot of things we all need to work on. And like I said, my suggestion is that we have that expectation for all faculty, whether, K-12 or higher ed, that we have this expectation that I need to build capacity. The institution needs infrastructure to support that. And then we need to change our mindsets away from online as an inferior type of education. So those are just some of my thoughts. I think that we can look to disaster ready pedagogy in terms of being able to pivot, in terms of having maybe a toolkit of some common shared digital resources for people to use and that kind of thing. So one thing that I saw during the pandemic was sort of a mental health toolkit. So like resources about staying well, or resources about not feeling stressed, while they may not be a panacea, they were at least available. So that those kind of shared resource building is one thing we can do. We can, and stay involved in our continuity plans. Like, does your university have one? What does it look like? What is the academic continuity that's in place for small scale events like school is shut down for one day, right, due to a thunderstorm. The continuity plan for, a week, again, maybe a weather event, or a continuity plan for a larger disaster like Hurricane Harvey in Houston impacted many people. And not only that, but some people were helping other people. So even if they weren't personally affected, they were maybe out of commission for learning. Another solution to continuity is considering how to shift to mobile devices. So kind of a plan B for online learning, if maybe there's power outages, is shifting to mobile devices, and that kind of thing, and making sure our learning is mobile responsive, that we can access things through phones. And we've all had to do this. Like if you're away from your keyboard and you're an online teacher, you may be checking in with your class on a mobile device, or even teaching a live session on a mobile device. And we've attended these on mobile devices. So thinking mobile can also be part of this preparedness. And then worst case scenarios where there's no electricity, how do we keep the learning going, and so on. Yeah, so those are just my thoughts. I think that when we shut down schools and we don't have this preparedness, it leads students to get behind. And this is a point of controversy. Some people don't think, that there was a deceleration of learning or learning loss, but there's a lot of research that suggests there was learning loss during the pandemic, and that some students never came back, some students went missing, many-fold problems involved with stopping education and disruption of learning. So sometimes the last thing on our minds is how to keep the learning going, but we can be better prepared.